This is Van Electric Ghost, and we are live on our YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook channels with Asher Laub for the first time. So thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Phantom. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we like to do in the music type of interviews. We've been doing them since 2016, and it's cool that we have Asher here. And we've got a bunch of background information on you that you provided. You have been, you got like a fan base over 100K. You've been in the US, UK, and Canada. You've been on PBS like 3 times, and you've actually played at Madison 2 times.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, maybe.
Unless there's a third that I forgot about.
Yeah, it said 3 on your profile, but maybe I don't.
Oh.
And then you played Madison Square Garden, Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, many, many more. So you're out there really doing it. And I've got your bio, but maybe we start, like, you tell me about your background. Maybe when did you start music? When did you get into music?
I started in diapers, to be clear. Started playing the classical violin at the age of 2.5. Not an actual violin, but a margarine box, because my fingers were too small, and they wrapped that box around with fake strings, which were really rubber bands, just so I could get the fingering. And then I moved to an actual tiny Chinese violin when I was about 3, 4, and I moved up each level playing the Suzuki method, which is like a Japanese method. Yeah, you basically memorize music, but you also learn basic etudes and scales.
Oh, cool.
So that's where it started.
I lived in Tokyo from 2004 to 2006. So I have a little bit of Japanese comprehension. Yeah. Well, I actually lived there. Yeah. Physically, I was actually there, but, yeah, it was fantastic. But, yeah. So
I wish.
Yeah, it's a fantastic environment. The musicians, I was just really impressed because you could go all over the city, especially in Shibuya, and they would be channeling different genres. So you could go to a club in like Roppongi, and then somebody would be channeling Coltrane, and another club it's like R&B, and another club it's like punk. It was like really interesting. It was like their take on it. It was like their Japanese version of it, which was pretty fantastic. I thought it was really cool to watch. You know, being a musician myself, I thought it was really interesting. But
that's really cool.
Yeah, and there's the original type of music they had too, but the fact that they would channel all these other forms was funny. But so you were kind of was this something that you wanted to do, or were did your parents kind of want to push you in that direction because they had been musicians?
Well, they were musicians. They weren't professional musicians. I think they were thinking, oh, it's a really good extracurricular. It's good for like mind development, so on and so forth. They sort of took after my aunt, who's in the Boston Symphony, and other musicians in the family.
Oh, cool. Okay, so I can see where it's coming from.
Yeah. Except I'm not a straight ahead traditional classical musician anymore. I mean, I have the background and I do play with orchestras, but my focus is more in the electronic realm of production and blending that with violin.
Oh, that's awesome.
Featuring the violin, yeah.
So you do like studio work with people who are doing like electronic music type genre?
Yes. So I produce some myself, and I collaborate with various artists, in the US and in Europe. And I try to, collaborate with electronic producers. And my focus is really on featuring the violin and giving it sort of like this spotlight within the electronic realm of music, because I feel like it has significant contributions to the electronic world that I haven't been realized yet. I don't think that they're all
like. Yeah, it's totally. Yeah, well, I like the idea when like ELO introduced like orchestration into rock. They had kind of like a Beatle-esque sound, and then they threw all these like all the orchestration in the violins they did. And I thought that when I heard it, I said that's really fantastic to go in that direction. To put more orchestration in. I mean, I'd already seen bands like Yes that was doing a lot of classical type inspired progressive rock. but
Yeah,
ELO kind of actually came in with the violins, and then that was like a little different approach.
it's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. But the reason why electronic really works very well in general with strings is because it's very melodic. The rhythm has got it's a sort of like a predictable
Yeah,
back rhythm. Typically, I mean, I know there's all sorts of subgenres. And like it's the type. What I love about the about the genre is that it gives space to an artist like myself to bring in something sophisticated from the
okay.
classical realm, which is my background, and still present a melody that is attractive and sort of
Hip, kind of hip.
consumable by the listener.
Yeah, it's kind of a hip thing because you know, because a lot of electronic music they're using, like I have drum machines, you know, between 808s and analog, you know, machines. I've got all kinds of, you know, 727s, 808s, whatever. But within electronic music, it's kind of famous for like Linn drums, 808s, 909s, stuff like
Mhm.
that. And the ability, you know, and my Roland's, a lot of our synths, we try to channel with our polyphonics what you do on your violin or what an orchestra does. It's like a synthesis when we have a pad, we're trying to channel kind of classical tones that because we're trying to
Mhm.
do chords that will actually mimic what a big orchestra would sound like on a pad. You know,
Mhm.
it's kind of
Mhm.
what, so it kind of fits within that kind of genre, in my opinion. But to actually use a
Yeah.
real instrument instead of the synth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some beautiful midis, and I play around with midis myself also in production. Um, what I've been doing with my violin in the studio, actually with some recent collaborations, um, is sort of showcasing a lot of improvisation, but also the violin layers, the
Mhm.
orchestral violin layers. In addition to that, electric guitar solos through the
Oh,
electric
wow.
violin.
Oh,
So
so you use an electric violin and you use like a standard kind of orchestra
yeah,
violin?
if you want a little show and tell, I have them right over here.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
show you
I
the.
don't mind
Give me
that as
one.
long as yeah, we can look at that.
Give me one
Yeah,
second. I'll bring it over here. So
so which one's this one gonna be? Is this the electric or
this
the
this is the
that's the electric?
electric,
Oh, that's awesome.
and
Kinda
it's
reminds
a
me of
closed
yellow.
body. Yeah, it's it's not just because of the cool looks. It also has some fantastic volume control.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Is it
Highs,
like
lows,
a
mids.
guitar? Does it have pickups like a guitar?
It's fretless. It does not have
Uh-huh.
frets, which I don't really need because I feel the notes. I don't really
Mhm.
need the reference as much. Um, but it plays like an electric guitar. If you hear some recordings that will be coming out, you'll hear, oh yeah, you won't be able to tell a difference. Um,
Wow. So you can
so
actually channel like solos and bend the strings in a similar way, or you like limitations because of the instrument? Can you do
I
like
would
the
say
pitch bends?
I would say identical way.
Okay, wow.
I mean, I play with a lot of electric guitars, and I don't really think that there's a difference. And I play electric guitar, by the way,
Yeah, yeah. So that's awesome. Can
but
you
I
do
don't.
harmonics? Can you do harmonics on it?
So that's something that the guitar probably does a better job than the violin with the distortion effects. Yeah, I could play like harmonics, and I mean, I could even just do it just rather regular violin. But like chord changes, it's a little
Mm,
bit better, I would say, on a guitar.
yeah,
But you can still do some cool chord changes, playing double
yeah.
stops and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
'cause I love well, the weird thing about me is I try to channel guitar on my synth. I can't play guitar, but I've for many years, I've tried to create guitar tones on my synthesizer so I can replicate guitar sounds by just doing the sound design so it would mimic like
Hmm.
harmonics and feedback and pitch bends and hammer-ons and sliding down the neck. I've found ways to actually replicate that on a keyboard, which is a
Yeah.
different technique.
It's I totally get it. It is a different technique, and as somebody who plays keyboard, like I work with actually synth keyboardists at live venues who do a similar thing to that. I mean, some of the guys have like really authentic tones. A lot of the guys, I
Mhm.
mean, these are expensive MIDIs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you
You
have to
know,
play around. I do a lot of analog stuff to replicate and then stack tons of effects and try to do the signal processing. I end up getting it to it through sound design. So it's a different aspect. But
so cool.
yeah, I think it's cool that you're actually using like the electric and the classical, like a standard like concert violin, right? You're using both.
Yeah. Yeah, this is my acoustic classical. This is much more expensive, but I mean they're
Yeah,
both in the
both.
thousands, but
Yeah, yeah.
this is more. So, but this is an open body. So on a live stage, it doesn't have the versatility of an electric.
hmm
Total wise, I wouldn't do distortion or guitar
How do
mimicking
you
type
mic
tone.
that when you're? How does that get mic'd when you're live?
So to minimize the feedback, it's got to go through a 1/4 inch input.
Okay.
So really like any instrument. And because of the F holes here, there's a lot of resonance in the wood, so you can end up getting feedback. But I over like 15 to 20 years of doing this live, I've got the pedals set up. It's just I find that the electric is 1,000
Yeah,
times easier.
you have more control, right? You have a lot more control.
Yeah, and it's funny because when the sound engineer's looking on stage, and if there's like a little bit of feedback, they look at me. I'm like, not any. Like, I never give feedback because I'm doing the
Yeah,
electric. It's the guy with the mic.
yeah,
It's the guy singing.
yeah. Because they're probably looking at you because like all violins are famous for that, so they're like, it's you.
Yeah, yeah. Notoriously, the instrument, the string instruments, to get the feedback, but not
Yeah,
me.
yeah. So but I was looking in your background, and you did talking about like how you worked earlier, really early, and you never rebelled against that. You kept on going, right? You did the Buffalo Philharmonic at like 13, right?
Yeah, that was I landed that. I was pretty lucky. That was cool. I played with the Greater Buffalo Youth Orchestra like as a kid. Did NISMA auditions and competitions. It was just what my siblings did and my peers. So that's what I did, and it was pretty intense classical upbringing. But moving to New York in 2002 was really my opportunity to hit the ground running and actually earn money doing what I'd learned my whole life
So when you
preparing
were
for.
so when you were there in New York, is that when you really started hitting all those big stages?
Yeah, well, it happened pretty quickly within like a few years. I sent in some demo tapes, got accepted to just different orchestras, and um, played on weekends to work my way through school, and then I started doing some big venues. Um, and I started hanging out with some band members, and we started to
Mhm.
travel a little bit, play in Georgia and LA and Texas, Florida. I remember, yeah, while I was an undergrad, so we were doing some cool gigs. It was fun.
That's pretty
I
cool.
didn't
So did
expect to make.
you? Yeah. So when did you kind of cross into the pop or like electronic or more modern music? When did you kind of make that transition? Because a lot of people that I've talked to that are classical, they kind of stay in that lane and they stay there unless they get burned out of it, and then they want to go into pop or they want to go into experimental. And they go like total opposite what they were doing.
Yeah, I would say I probably pushed that the pop genre around almost immediately. Actually, it was really within the first year that I started playing in New York because I realized that there was a demand for it.
Hmm.
Started like at weddings and private events, and it was like, okay, I could really like show these musicians and these band leaders that I'm not just part of the string ensemble at the cocktail hour. I could play with the band, and that gave me all sorts of opportunities. And I bought a Zeta Electric,
Hmm.
which was heavy as hell on my back, very heavy.
That's
Probably
heavy.
about as
It's
heavy,
heavy. It's
very
heavy like
heavy.
a guitar.
Um, yeah, and it's on your shoulder, so uh,
Yeah, yeah, that's
it
heavy.
was it was really bad for somebody like me with my um I don't know, low bone density, whatever you want to call it. I'm a weakling.
Oh,
I've had. It's not even that I'm weak muscular wise. Just my muscles have been imbalanced due to playing the violin for so many years, and I've had chronic inflammation for many decades.
Okay, so
That's
that
led
made
me
it harder.
down some yeah, that's
Yeah,
led me
so
down some bad paths.
I saw you had a health, you were able to get over. I don't know how much you want to get into that. You say that you had a nightmare like in 2014, that you had
Yeah.
challenges. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much an open book. Just my listeners, if they're checking this out, they probably already heard it like 52 times, so I don't want to
Mm,
bore them to death.
you don't want to. Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, in a nutshell, yeah, I'm happy sharing. Basically, I was in a wheelchair due to adrenal insufficiency. It actually happened 6 years after I was diagnosed with an inflammatory disease,
hmm,
and just kind of ignored it. But I had to. I obviously was very fatigued regularly, so on and so forth, and became more and more difficult to lift the instrument. But adrenal insufficiency landed me in a wheelchair. I was pretty much a vegetable for many months and almost lost everything, lost my career, and swung back. Very long story short, and I got better with a lot of focus and self motivation. I'm going to
yeah,
emphasize the word self, and it's kind of reshaped my life, my outlook on life, and my career outlook as well, and sort of moved me into the dancing violinist realm. And
yeah, yeah. Because it talks about in your background, you reinvented yourself as a dancing violinist, and then you got into hip hop and pop and EDM and rock, which is really
yeah,
interesting because what I try to do with like I have my own independent label for the music I do. I call it expansive sound because when I was doing
oh,
electronic music, people were trying to put me into EDM and trance, and I'm like, no, I like to do fusion. I like to do like bebop. Depend on the day. I might try to channel the Clash or channel like Yes. So I'm kind of going however I want. I don't want to get pinned down. So it's interesting that you cross genre too, like kind of this expansive kind of view that you've come classical, and then you're crossing into all these other genres.
well, let me ask you, because you mentioned that. Is your like eclectic production style a result of your listeners? Are you responding to them, or is it something
No,
that you want to do?
I grew up listening to like everything. My father had a combination of like Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, Stevie Wonder, and the Beatles. He was all over the map. He basically anything that was good, didn't matter what genre. If it was really good, he would get it. And so I grew up, and then my older brother, 7 years older than me, he was listening to like Zeppelin and Doors and all this. And my mom was listening to the Carpenters. So my whole house was full of all these different genres, and I liked them all. And I said, well, if I'm going to be a musician, it's like I kind of like it all. So being a keyboardist, I could play it, like because we can. It's a writing instrument. So if I could figure
Yeah.
out what's going on, I could get into anything, and that's kind of a very eclectic taste because I kind of grew up around music like that. That's how I got into it.
Totally get it. So I feel like I try to respond to my listeners as often as I can, and I try to adapt my music to meet their needs, even though it's sometimes painful, because it's like, when I'm live streaming on Facebook, they're like, "Can you play Elvis?" And I know some of them are gonna be watching this and be like, "Shame on you, Asher." And I love Elvis. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah, yeah,
but there's so much out there that I feel like people need to hear.
yeah.
Um,
Maybe you don't want to do Elvis. Maybe you wanted to show them something maybe that you think they would like, but maybe they don't know they would like it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of open-minded people that I'm privileged to be able to play like live to on Facebook, in particular, and just other channels, YouTube, Instagram.
Hmm.
But it's it's most gratifying when I get to play a blend of different genres that show
Hmm.
the sophisticated edge of the violin, but also bring in contemporary type rhythm, specifically in
Well, I think
electronic.
yeah, because kids today, like a lot of kids today, the first thing they look at when they see a violin is like, well, no, I want an MPC. They want to get they want to get a matrix based producer machine, and I want nothing to do with the guitar or the drums or anything. They want to go right to
Yeah,
that, and I think it's really cool when you have a musician that's talented that can show people. Maybe you want to use a flute, right? Maybe you want to use a violin. Maybe you want to get into like I was talking to an artist that was on uh yeah, like it was on a harpsichord, which nobody
Mhm.
is doing, right? Nobody does it. It's like, but yeah, it's cool. They were doing something really cool with it. I said, well, that's pretty interesting, and it's just I think people should try to approach it like a vibraphone. I mean, back in the 50s, everybody in jazz like has a vibraphone in the unit, but like how many kids are learning that today? Not really a lot.
Or not too many.
Yeah. So, if you listen to jazz, you're going to find all kinds of cool instruments, but like whether or not you have that focus. But I think it's cool
Well,
what you're doing because kids need to see like everything they can.
yeah. Well, on the topic of jazz, I'm lucky enough to play with a bunch of jazz musicians, and I always feel a little bit kind of deficient because I don't have, like, again, I'm a classical musician with like good improv
Yeah, yeah,
chops,
yeah,
but some of these fusion guys play like Chick Corea, and it's like,
yeah. You play
wow,
like
and
Davis
it's like,
or
I,
Coltrane or
and I want to
Monk.
sit down, yeah, and I want to sit down and I want to like really like nail those lines, but there's just like there's a whole world of music to consume out there, and I just don't simply have the time. Like, I'm spending half my time just working out the midis and the programming and the
Oh
DAW,
yeah.
and like
What do you
upgrading the
think?
equipment.
What do you think about that? Being a classical musician, like you most of the time, you got totally organic acoustic environments, but when you get into the electronic world, now you're into the MIDI, now you're into like the DAWs. Do I would think do I don't know, make an assumption. Would classical musicians, when they look at the DAW, they like, well, I know I don't like that. I like to just do it live. I don't want to.
I
I don't
know
want to play with
I know a bunch of classical musicians who are like, it's just, they're most comfortable with just reading music, and
it. Yeah, just reading it off the
I
sheet,
totally
and then
get
like,
it.
yeah,
If you've been reading sheet music and it just comes easy, why do you want to bend over backwards trying to learn all this tech? It's a big learning curve. It really is.
it's not over.
Even DJing. Do
Yeah.
you DJ live?
Well, I've got like, yeah, I basically do live performance, and I've got a lot of tools. So I've got like a Nakai Force that basically clip-based Ableton like workflow, right? And it's on a matrix grid machine that can basically kick off. I can have a song in an arranger mode, but the
Uh-huh.
song is structured 8 lanes, and then each lane is a clip, and then I can actually kick them off, and I can restructure them, and I can change them, so I can just run. I don't like CDJ, these kind of 64 key pad systems where I can just kick off my song and rearrange it. So I can start with my song as I wrote it, and then if I feel like it, I can just totally destroy it and rearrange it and just kick it off however I want, or just do like a DJ set and just be kicking off specific songs and then kind of change them on demand because I've got the structures all clipped out, and then I can
You're
just
saying
kick off.
in
Yeah,
Ableton?
I actually have a device that's Ableton like. It's called an Akai Force. It basically can work in an Ableton format, but it has
Uh-huh.
its own format, and it can go into what is called an arranger mode. In arranger
Ah,
mode, it can kick off clips however
yeah.
you want. So it
That's
has
so cool.
tons of control. So it's not like a CDJ where I have like 64 keys and all kinds of controls. I can
Right.
go into the filters, I can go into the envelopes, I can go to effects on demand and change everything in real time.
That's awesome.
That's what
I,
I like.
I,
I'm a control freak.
hey,
So,
that's a good pun there. I'd love to see you in action.
yeah, I just like having control over my gear. Like you see all my gear. So, I'm kind of an old
Nice.
school synthesis. So I got like a rack, a sense and modular sense, and I've got my pad controls, and I've got my own mixer. So if I go to a club, I have my own mixer that's right on my board, so I can control my own mix before it even hits the soundboard because I'm a control freak.
I get you. Like, I feel this. I feel kind of protective of my performance as well. Even playing just the violin with the whole band next to me. At this point, after many years of like depending on the sound engineer for my tone, and many of these guys, they're just not, they're not cutting it.
Yeah, I can get it. I know what you're
They're like
talking about.
overwhelmed by like 30 pieces on a bandstand. And it's
Yeah.
like, you know what? If you're too overwhelmed, like I'm just gonna learn how to mix and like how to
Control your
present
own
like the
sound.
perfect tone to you. So you just keep it dry. And that's what you got to really do with these big productions. You just have to have
Yeah,
your
I
tone.
started showing up in clubs, and I just decided I want my own board. So I have my own mixing board before it ever hits them, and I can control it. And I keep the levels from blowing up because I can see it, and I can see all my meters. And I just want to keep my sound to sound like what I'm supposed to sound like, right? So make sure, and I can hear it, and I can control it. You know, unless he really messes it up, I can usually keep it under control. But yeah, it's a matter of like I know what I want, so I'm not one of these guys that doesn't know what I want.
Yeah.
You know, but I think as a musician, you probably know what you want. So
yeah, no, I can completely relate.
So when you got into these other genres, like which one is the one that you started first? Did you start hip hop first or pop for it first, or is it all of them at the same time?
I would say hip hop kind of came last because I wasn't immediately into it so much. I was more into pop. Felt like it was more melodic and fit the violin better. And turns out there's like, but there's just there's a real appreciation for violin in the hip hop scene, which is interesting.
You can see that because hip hop has started to, they channel jazz. When you started getting like kind of like Amar started bringing in jazz type of feel. They started bringing. There was lots of bands that were taking jazz samples. Back in the day, even in early hip hop, they would sample Coltrane or they sample like India the Monk, or they go and they would pick things out and pick the clips out, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I always follow in the guys that had the interesting sampling, because people thought sampling's terrible, but some producers are so good at what they pick, what they choose to sample, and I'm like, wow, this guy's got a deep knowledge of music. He's actually sampling really interesting things, and that's when I started getting more of an appreciation, because I was back in the keyboard players. I'm like, what are these guys doing, just clipping stuff? And like, they're not writing their own stuff. So, but then I started looking at, wow, they're actually very creative in what they pick to sample. And I said, okay, it is an art.
It is an art if you do it right. But a lot of guys out there. I mean, a lot of guys that I've worked with live, I have not been exactly blown away by in terms of their skill, at least in relating to other musicians. So, some of the festival DJs, I'm more impressed, much more impressed with like their taste. And again, because a lot of DJs I work with, they're just kind of doing their thing, and they're not trying to connect with. They're not interested in connecting with the other musicians on stage. The DJ orchestra type of situation. Which is actually one of the reasons why I went to DJ myself, because I felt like I know what works with the violin, and I'd like to,
control it more.
Produce, produce the kind of music live that really works with it. So,
you have a better aesthetic. Knowing the instrument, you have a better appreciation of where it could go. And I do say that one of the things I have a problem with some DJs today is like, they're on a trampoline thing up and down with six pack, and they're like, not to push them down, but you got some people that's like, it's more of a performance. They're more performers, and maybe they wrote it in their lab, but when they go to perform it, it's kind of like they just hit the play button and they're bouncing all over the place. And like, I'm a performer. Like, I'm a musician. I'm gonna play, and you guys are like bouncing around, and like, so I don't know if you're really playing or you're just.
I mean, like the big festival DJs. I don't know. Do people? I don't think people care what they're doing back there. Like I think they're just excited about
hear what they want to hear. As long as they want to hear the beat and they've got the stuff going, it doesn't matter if it's already pre-programmed on the loop.
I mean, guys like Griffin, who I had the privilege of playing with a few years ago. He's like a big producer with not Epic Records. I'll remember. Interscope Records. He's
Okay.
like he's the epitome of an artist. Like as far like compared to these other guys, like he's a pianist, a guitarist, like percussionist. He plays
Okay.
the
So
instrument. So
he knows how to, yeah. So what I've seen is I've seen guys who get on stage and they've got like a modular synth and they've got their CDJ so they're actually performing and actually playing the music. And then I've seen other
yeah,
guys have got like a little stick and they're bouncing around and they're doing all this stuff. They're like they're like a hype man, right? So it's like like the difference between like an old school DJ that was actually on the platters, actually playing vinyl and actually doing it.
oh
Where
yeah,
that's a talent. If you go to the old school,
yeah,
they got
it
some
is.
clubs in New York where you have to. They're like vinyl only DJs that you have
Yeah,
to show you know how to do it, right? you
Dumbo
know,
Vinyls. I have a friend actually at Dumbo Vinyls, and they've been pushing
yeah,
that whole trend.
yeah. What
On
kind
the
of like you really have to show that you know.
yeah,
And then that I always have respect when somebody is really doing the craft. Then I'm like,
yeah,
okay, fine, that's cool. That's cool. But if you're just pushing a button and bouncing, I'm like, okay, I could have
yeah.
stayed home for that.
I love the vinyl type texture. It's a cool, what's the word? Like it brings you back to the '70s, sort of. It's a good
Yeah, it's
feeling.
just really scratching and really making the choices between the multiple decks and the
Yeah,
transitions is
yeah.
art.
The
When you
retro
watch the old
feel.
school, yeah, if you watch somebody like 82, 83, 84, when they really started doing it and saw the skill of some of these guys. I used to see them live and I'm like, wow, these guys actually are doing something. As a musician, wasn't that impressed until I actually went to a show and saw somebody actually doing it and doing it really well. And I said, wow,
Yeah,
that actually is a skill to actually do it
yeah.
right.
It's got to be real hard. I mean, it's interesting that it's swung back, but it's like you need like a real well organized deck of.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You
You
have
need
to
to know
really know.
exactly where your records
Yeah.
are.
I mean, you totally are. What happens is these guys are like hyper fans of the music they're using. So
Yeah,
they know everything about it. They know where everything is.
yeah,
So they actually know how to make the choices. And that's the cool thing about a DJ because they know how to get the groove. And I actually worked as a producer with a DJ one time. It was really cool because they're very groove focused. So if you're actually trying to write a really hit song, having a guy that knows where the grooves are or can identify grooves is a good producer because they can actually tell you when you're not hitting it. you know,
yeah, yeah.
it's actually a good talent if you have the guys who are like really focused on that. But,
You know, I wonder these vinyl DJs. I wonder if are they just coming into the gig with multiple suitcases of
yeah,
of
back
records?
in the day, they'd have these like big, they were actually kind of like my road cases. They were like road cases that held the vinyl. They actually were a road case type of format, like what you put your amps and stuff in, but they had the vinyls in them. And they would bring them onto the stage with these road cases because they wanted to protect them. So they were actually in these road cases, and they'd have them up on the racks, and they had them in special orders based on what they were doing. And it was intricate. I mean, they put a lot of time in,
Wow.
and I realized how
Oh
much time
yeah.
they're actually prepping
I
is as
can't
much as
imagine how
any.
much prep goes into
Yeah, just
that.
like in us, any musician that puts the practice in. It's like these guys are practicing at the level of a musician because they are.
I mean,
You know,
it's got to be a bit stressful. I mean, for me, if I'm DJing an event like a wedding or something, the I mean, I constantly get these requests for all these random songs, and I would panic if I didn't have access to an online database where I
yeah,
could just
yeah,
dig it up on Wi-Fi and then throw it in and then match the BPM.
yeah.
But
That's the
oh my
the whole
god, if I were in
skills.
the '70s, I'd lose my mind. I'd be like, I'm sorry, I don't have that song. I had it. You have to have a
Yeah,
huge
well,
repertoire.
their repertoire was crazy, and the amount of stuff they would have that they had to carry, like it is today. Like, okay, why do you want that overhead? But there's an authenticity about it. It's kind of like punk music. I always tell people, like when I'm producing, I really like having a punk aesthetic. If you think about like a Trent Reznor or the Clash or any like replacements, if you come at it something with a kind of Nirvana point of view, right? If you're doing all this really high productions type stuff, but then having a lo-fi sound like early Nirvana or having a sound like Paul Westerberg in the Replacements out of Minnesota. There's something honest about having that kind of guttural attack that's very honest. And so,
Mhm.
like, I'll go and say, well, did you really want to overproduce this with all this stuff, or want to be bare bones and sound like Joe Strummer in the Clash? Because there's
Mm.
something about that that's pretty powerful. I like going at that kind of edge because I think there's something exciting about it. I like it, but it's my
Very cool.
opinion.
Are you playing? Are you playing like MIDI keyboard on stage when you're doing live DJ?
I
Live
actually play.
DJ?
I play real synths. I actually have Junos, like actual synthesizers, not MIDI's, like real synthesizers. They're not channeling from a laptop. They're actually like Yamahas and Prophets and Moogs. They're actually
Uh,
full, either monophonic or polyphonic full synths, like Jupiters and
very cool.
Juno 106 and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Huh.
Well, it's an
Good to
old
know.
school because I'm a child of the '70s, so I saw some of these bands like the first showed up with like Depeche Mode and Joy Division and The Cure and Duran Duran, Nick Rhodes on his Jupiter 8, and I would just sit there watching them. And I read the keyboard magazines. I was like 18 years old, going
Uh,
into Guitar Center and actually looking at a Jupiter or looking at a Prophet 5, and I was very enamored with them. I'm like, wow, these things, like people at the time were denigrating them and saying these aren't real instruments. Now
huh.
everybody wants like a Prophet 5, they want an Oberheim or they want a Jupiter because they actually have a lot of character. And
Uh,
people might not realize, but they do have a lot of character. Each model is like very unique.
well, there's always haters out there.
Yeah, there's always some hater.
Yeah, it's funny. There's haters for the electric violin. There's like groups of like classical musicians who they call the electric violin. What's the word? It's like trying to think of the word. It's like sacrilegious. That's what they call it.
Oh, that kind of reminded me when Dylan went electric, they called him Judas. They started yelling at him. Like there's a famous like tape of Dylan going from sounding like Woody Guthrie and Arlo Guthrie, and he suddenly came out electric, and his fans in London started yelling Judas.
Yeah, I remember that. But I remember I like went to the museum. He's in a bunch of museums, and I remember that actually being like one of the points that stuck out in my mind. But the electric violin is not something brand spanking new, So I find it really funny that there's still people out there trying to like reverse time and bring us back to the classical age and pretend like that's actually going to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, because music has to progress. So, the electric guitar, there's a lot of folk guys, well, I won't touch it. Okay, fine, don't touch it. But, Dylan was in the folk world for how long? Channeling Woody Guthrie and Arlo Guthrie. And then eventually he got bored with it and he went electric. And it kind of like, there's nothing wrong with people wanting to stay on an acoustic instrument. I understand like a piano. Yeah, a grand piano is great. Mm-hmm. But like a Hammond B3 or playing like any of these modern synths, I love a pure piano sound. There's reasons why I will have a piano based song and maybe not throw a synth on it because it can evoke a lot of emotion. And it's like, it's like an acoustic guitar. It's a writing instrument. You can do really intimate type of stuff with it. So, but it doesn't take away from the fact that, Stevie Wonder used a really awesome synthesizer on Saturn. The song Saturn, it's amazing, and he used this like he used a Dream Machine. And that machine was like channeling like analog polyphonic sound. And it sounded really crazy strings that don't sound like real strings. But it sounds like otherworld strings. And you're like, wow, that's pretty fantastic. So
well, that might have been the closest that they could get to strings at the time.
Yeah, but it sounded like how Stevie interpreted it. Like, well, I'm not going to try to make them sound like strings. I'll let them be what they are. And then it sounded like Saturn became this thing. Was like, wow, if you let that synth be what it is,
it
actually becomes.
Yeah, and of course, he sounds great on every recording.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's just a phenomenal. Whether he's playing organ or piano or synth, he's just like on it. He's just one of the guys like you look at like, oh, can I get even 1/10 of where he is?
Yeah, and then when you mentioned Bruno Mars, I would say he's in that category of Stevie Wonder in terms of just not exactly a
Yeah.
genre, but he sort of brought pop music. He's given pop music its character again.
Yeah, well, he's got the talent. You got when you get these guys that actually know how to play, and then they bring that talent to the music. That's why I really love the fact that you're playing the violin in this age where people would say, "Well, I'm just going to MIDI that to a sampled violin and then play it on a keyboard, right, through a MIDI keyboard instead of actually having you play it on the real instrument." Because there's nothing like playing a tone that's supposed to be on the instrument that it's coming from. That my opinion as a producer, that there's something about the authenticity of a real flute player playing on a flute rather than running sample flute on MIDI. You
Yeah,
know,
so people who are capable of hiring, of just bringing in the MIDI strings, they hire me anyway for studio recordings because I bring like a unique kind of tone to the project, and also not just the tone, but also the notes. The
yeah, how you
character,
play the
the
notes.
improvisation that you'd have to pretty much spend more money hiring like a producer to write out the notes and then have like a classical musician play it. And I'm sort of created in real, while I'm recording
Well,
in
there's
my
all that
studio.
there's all that technique that's on your actual violin itself. It's like a guitar player. Like if you do nothing but sample the guitars and clip them together, right? It's
Mhm.
not going to be as natural as if you had somebody playing like Jimmy Page, the real guitar work.
Yeah.
The real guitar work's always going to exceed what you thought you could do with the studio trickery. you know,
Yeah.
in my opinion, but
Yeah. Um, yeah, I happen to agree with you on all this stuff. I mean, you're a musician and you deal with electronic production, so we can relate to each other in that in a lot of aspects of this conversation. So it's pretty cool.
so what do you think about, like, have you ever like played around with sampling yourself and then manipulating the sample and
Yeah.
coming up with something different than what you would have done naturally
Yeah.
playing it?
So yeah, there's all these like producer loops type things that make it really easy to kind of throw together songs. Um, but um because I am kind of a unique producer, I always feel like there's something missing in these um what's the word, in these like cut and paste loops. You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
yeah. I
sort
know,
of
like
like cut and
clicks,
paste. Like
click.
here, like here's how it's gonna sound. Download the loop samples and then put them together like a puzzle. It'll sound exactly like that, or maybe
Nah,
slightly
yeah,
different.
that's the
And I feel like
problem.
I like the verse, but the chorus kind of sucks. And it's like too Skrillex like, and it needs a melody.
Yeah.
So
So you rather just play it. That's what I actually I've gone like anti-DAW, where I've gone back to hardware recorders and I actually put down the tracks and hand play the parts rather than trying to clip them. I actually go in and I'll play my Moog bass line through the whole 4 minutes, actually play it down on a multi-track. So I'm
uh,
not using a computer. I'm actually using a multi-track recorder, and I'll put the bass line down. I'll put the drums down. They're all go on separate tracks, and then I can mix and master them like 1970. And it is something about doing it that way that I find actually I learn the song instead
uh,
of clipping it around as a puzzle. I actually learn my song. Like by the time I'm done producing my song, I actually know how to play it.
yeah,
I don't have to go
that's
back and relearn it.
that's a true musician. That's a true performer. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to get because people are like, "I don't wanna do it that way." It's like, "Okay."
So I I get it because it's like how much time do you have in a day? But if you have a real passion for music, it's like sometimes you just gotta, like, I'll sit there for hours until I get it right because I just want to, because I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to listen to this music for years, and my
yeah.
listeners are gonna judge me on that for years, and I just want it to be right. So
Yeah, well, I think this is about knowing an instrument versus being a producer. I think there's a difference, there are people that really might I mean, they know how to use a MIDI keyboard, they know how to go into the box and move the clips around. They can be brilliant in their choices of how they move them around and how they
mhm.
make decisions, and that's fine. but like, is that equal to what Eddie Hazel did, you know, or what, like, any of the old, like George Clinton, or Prince, or Tom Petty, or any of the people that actually sat in that studio,
Studio, and they
like,
recorded.
Fleetwood Mac, in Sunsound City, and they sat down at that on those, and they just played it through, or the Allman Brothers, they all came in and they played it through. I mean, there's something about playing it through that I'm
Yeah.
always going to be like, Exile on Main Street, Keith Richards actually in that mansion playing that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, there's something about Keith actually playing it. I'm always going to say Exile on Main Street is a rock record, because he's like, he's doing it. He's living
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And the real musicians and the real listeners, they know the difference between them. And I like, you listen to, I mean, guys like Martin Garrix, like, I know he's like the biggest DJ in the world, but I don't know. Whenever I see pictures of him, or like on social media, it looks like he's kind of cutting and clipping. I don't know. Is he a live musician? Like, the stuff that he's producing?
It's like a production. To me, it's like the difference between a producer and actually, like, you get a guy who actually, like a Paul Westerberg, from the Replacements. He's a musician, producer, and he these really indie rock, heartfelt songs, and they're not super big, right? But he can evoke a lot of emotion. Some of his songs have been on soundtracks. I mean, he just had this kind of indie kind of, reverence. He loved, like, Alex Chilton from Big Star, the guy who used to sing in the Box Tops, and he liked to channel this, like Beatle-esque kind of honest pop. And there's something about, somebody actually builds a song with the intro and the outro, and they've got multiple, the George Martin technique, the Abbey Road type of technique, where you've got multiple songs kind of like, phasing in like a progressive rock piece or a classical music. It's actually got movements and changes. But where's that in modern music? Where are the changes? Where are the key changes? Where are the timing changes? Where's the intro? Where's the outro?
What you're talking about is I think the making of Spotify.
Yeah.
I think Spotify it's really an offshoot of Google and Facebook. And I'm probably being punished for saying this by the algorithm, but it's like that, like they've created a system where the more content, the better off you are. So it's like people are just pumping out crap. People are just like pumping out as much music as possible, and it's like people who sort of want to keep authentic to their artistry. They'll pump out a little bit less just so they can keep the quality of the music. But it's hard to compete against people.
Hard.
Just like every day a new song, and it's not like they don't care. They just need new content. So
the problem I have is just the old artistry of the 70s, like the playlisting, because I'm a child of the 70s. I like to listen to albums. Right. So I like Tommy. I like Quadrophenia. I like Stories. I like Born to Run. The idea of that song that Springsteen wrote is like, it's a story. It's like, it's got this, like, it's built up like it's a wall of sound. He took like 6 months to put it together. He kept on layering it. And it's just, there's something about the artistry of actually caring about it, that you put the effort, you put your best, you put your life into it. And it's like, how many of these guys writing today are putting their life into it, like they feel it's like that's the last thing they might ever do.
It's hard to, unfortunately, I think it's, unless you're dealing with a major label, and even then I don't even think that's the case. It's hard to make a living pouring your heart into 6 months worth of a song. I did that with Atlantis. Actually, I spent many months on that one. That's actually the song that just came out now, but I don't do that with every song, and that's why I sometimes need to, like, release. I release songs pretty much every month, but sometimes I have to kind of stagger my original releases with covers, because it's something I don't really have to think about. I got to just pump it out, just to keep people sort of engaged.
So when you wrote an original song, Atlantis, that's the song.
Yeah,
and that one took. Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, because I spent like 2 years on my last project. I was going through hours and hours of stuff and then trying to figure out what was going to work. And it's kind of like an old school way of doing it. It's like, you build up this big catalog of stuff and you try to find the things that actually work. And it's like, well, I'm going to focus on that and I'm going to whittle it down until I get something out of like, 10 hours worth of work and make it work in like an hour. Right. And it take 10 hours and drop down to an hour, like the best pieces. And 2 years out of your life to try to get to something. And, it's like, oh, well, these other guys were just throwing out 2 minutes every week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much music you're sitting on that you haven't released, but I can't possibly keep up with all the content. So I can't sit on that much music.
Well, I got a bunch. I actually put out stuff all the time, and then I sit on stuff that's like part of a bigger thing because I kind of into concept. Like I like bands like the Peter Gabriel Genesis, like Pink Floyd, like the Who, Quadrophenia, and Tommy. So I'll sit on a project, but I'll put out singles, but they're not part of that project. They're like, okay, to keep me out there, I'll put the singles out, but I'll work on this bigger project because I do that type of work. And I'm like into progressive rock, or progressive jazz. To me, it kind of cross together, like a fusion band and a progressive rock band. Not that far apart. They go the same way, so I'm kind of thinking in that mode. So it takes a while to put those together, to get to what you want. Sometimes you just naturally come up with something. Like, kind of, what are your like thoughts? Like some musicians I've talked to, they're like, oh, well, it just came to me in the woods, or I woke up in the middle of the night and had this full idea, or I'm writing it on the napkin. Does it kind of come out of anywhere, or do you have like a certain way that you come up with what you're going to work on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So in the case of Atlantis, I was sort of imagining a theme, but I kind of, in that, it's always different with every song. But in the case of Atlantis, I was looking to blend 3 different genres: hip hop, electronic, and classical. And I wanted to showcase the violin in a way that was sort of like melodically appealing. So, but also kind of sophisticated. And I started with the pretty much the chorus and the main melody, and then I kind of worked on the keyboard with the chord progression, and then I guess the rhythm kind of came later in that case. But in the case of Neon Dreams, probably my first. Yeah, what's that?
No, that's interesting that the rhythm came later, because I talked to so many people today are so beat focused. Like that's the first thing they ever do. Like in the modern world, like the rhythm is like number one.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that you came at it in the way you did. I think that's why I love it. I like the fact that you didn't do it that way, because I think when you only focus on the rhythm, you kind of get certain results.
Yeah, I mean, I try to focus more on the chord progression more so than the rhythm, because I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it, and there are great producers that focus on the rhythm first, and great producers that focus on the chord progression first and not the melody. In this case, I was just thinking the melody, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. The case of Neon Dreams, I think it was sort of, I mean, it was a number of years ago, but that was probably one of my bigger songs. That was more or less like chord progression with rhythm, and I was just thinking epic symphonic type of vibe. If you ever listen to it, how about you? How about yourself?
Well, a lot of times I'll start with chord progressions I'll set my roll into piano mode. And so it will actually, be channeling like an 88 key piano.
Yeah.
And I have 100 different choices of piano to pick. And I just try to find the one that's going to fit what I'm trying to do. And what I find sometimes is I'll have my mic and I'll just put my recorder on and I'll do stream of consciousness lyrics, just throwing chords together as a demo track. Because it's like if I sing, have my mic open and I have my piano keys there, it's kind of like when you have an acoustic guitar, you can kind of come up with a happy accident, right? You just, I might have an idea that I wrote as a poem, and then I'm like, I'm going to use that to channel something, and I'm just going to let it go down. And I find like, I go back to that, and maybe like a second or third take is actually really good. And if I spend like too many takes on it, then I destroy the original intent, and then I'll start to layer other things on it and kind of just leave it honest. So I kind of come at it with like a stream of consciousness style recording, was what I used to obsess and be really oh, I got to do this. And I lately,
Yeah.
I've kind of trusted my instincts and do a lot of stream of consciousness recording that actually ends up becoming layers. And then I work on those layers. That's my technique lately.
Very, very cool. Um, so I could relate to a lot of what you said. A happy accident. I like how you use that phrase, because I find that when I'm in the studio, I'm just constantly trying to do a better take, and I'm not sure if the previous take was better than the one that I do now. So I'm constantly just adding new tracks, but muting them,
Mm-hmm.
um, just in case I kind of change my mind and I like the previous take. But happy accidents are really the way to go. Like that's how you discover good music. It's like, oh yeah, I tried all these different permutations, and I liked how this bass line worked out with this chord progression and melody.
Yeah. I mean, because there's so many
all the time.
stories like the Kinks, like You Really Got Me. That was a broken amp. And the producers
Huh.
they wanted to throw it out and say, "Well, that amp is broken. We can't use that." And the Davies brothers are like, Ray Davies and his brother are like, "No, that's it. Don't make us. We're not going to do it on the fixed amp. The broken amp is the sound."
Yeah.
And and it was Hendrix was famous for challenging his recording engineers because they were like, "Well, we got to edit this stuff out. It's too noisy. It's too this, too that." But that's what Hendrix sound was. It was all this
Yeah.
feedback. It was all this stuff that wasn't normal. And so if you edit it out, then you destroy what it is.
Yeah.
So sometimes the innovators are doing stuff that's like, oh, it's a broken amp. Oh, it's out
Yeah.
of key. It's like, well, it's actually good because it's out of key. Because Lou Reed was famous for going in and actually using out-of-tune guitars. And
Mm.
engineers used to get ticked off at him because he's like, but he'd be like, you know what? That our version actually is the best one to go with that.
Yeah.
And he would be very adamant that that's what you should use.
That's funny. So I'm pretty retentive with intonation. I cannot stand like I have to listen to a recording on my phone and in my car and like on 3 different laptops before I release it, because I want to make sure that there's nothing that I missed in terms of intonation. If something's flat or sharp, drives me insane. But the artistry, I get it. I totally get what you're saying with like different in other genres. I guess I'm a little bit too commercial with my releases, but I have a lot of people in mind when I
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what your core audience is. I've always kind of liked that kind of lo-fi punk approach. Like I like bands like Sun Ra and Husker Du and the Cramps and a lot of bands that were kind of like lo-fi on purpose. Maybe do it on the third take, but then they've got critical reviews because they had this honesty to their stuff, right? So whether or not, if you think about Neil Young and Crazy Horse, he could go to Nashville and do something perfectly clean, perfect voice, but then he goes with Crazy Horse and he just goes off and like he's kind of like almost crying. His pitch is a little off, and there's something about like Tonight's the Night where it's tons of imperfections that people wanted to edit out, and he said, "No, leave it that way." And if you think about that, there's something about that that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess there's a lot to be said about what you just mentioned, because in the context of social media, I'm sort of forced to be imperfect and to play flat and to have intonation problems or to like release or to just have like awkward whatever moments.
Mm-hmm.
And often those awkward moments are highlighted by social media, or maybe by the viewers, or I don't know which one it is, how much is being manipulated by the algorithm. But I guess that's what people like. They like to see mistakes and errors and
Yeah, I mean the perfectionist in us will edit out the stuff but the weird thing is sometimes it's the thing that you think is like that's no good, and that's
yeah.
what you think is like the worst thing. A lot of artists I've read stories where famous artists are like, well, that's never gonna go anywhere. That's like garbage, right? And then that's their number one hit. And they're like,
Huh.
and then they're sitting there like, I never even liked that song. But that's the song that did it. And then the song they wanted to do it didn't do it. And then they're sitting there like, oh, It's like, I guess I don't know my own music. It's like, 'cause the
You
fans
know,
actually pick the song, you know?
I feel that way all the time with my live performances, even with my single releases. I find that the successes are like, huh? Why did that like
Why did that
weren't
work?
you paying attention to the song I just wrote? Like I worked my ass off on that one, and you're looking at this crap. And like for live performances, like I just played like some real bad notes tonight, and you're complimenting me, or like it drives me insane, honestly, because I
Yeah,
feel
that's
like
right. Sometimes it's
I'm the
not good.
musician, I should know what sounds good, but
Yeah.
apparently that doesn't resonate.
Well, the fans kinda take over, you know, like, what the fans like, what the audience like,
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
can be really mind numbing. I mean, like Prince used to get really annoyed because he had I love Prince, like, he has this massive catalog of tons of stuff that never came out,
Yeah.
and he
Was
made
that because of the
choices.
record label? Probably because of the record label, because they wanna keep
Yeah, the
releasing
record
stuff
label, he just used to
intermittently.
have a crazy output. His output was, like, insane. He got, like, 10,000 songs that never released, but, and
Well, he
then
used to record stuff in his bathroom.
yeah, well, yeah, his house was his recording studio, you know?
Yeah,
He made it $1,000,000 house is a recording studio. So he was living in the studio, he's writing, like, all the time. They never stopped. So the
yeah.
problem with him is, like, even on, like, the big releases, he would make choices and say, "This should be the single," and then Warner Brothers would say, "No," and they actually were right. They actually picked the right songs because he wasn't gonna pick those songs. Like, the choices he would have made wouldn't have worked. And
Ah,
so it kinda shows you, like, he was a really high level pop musician, probably one of the most experimental musicians to actually be in pop.
ah.
And and his choices were actually more experimental, and the audience probably wouldn't have dug it. And the songs that like, he was like, "Oh, you know, that's not that great." And that's the one that made it, you know?
But you
You
know
know,
what? You
so I
look at
think
guys. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's what I meant.
The
Go ahead.
you look at, like, experimental jam bands like Fish, you
Oh,
know,
yeah, that's a good
totally
band.
unconventional, just making huge waves with their fans, you know, they attract long-term, intense support from fans. And I don't know if it's just like certain brand of fans, I don't know. But those are the kinds of guys that would have latched onto his unreleased music.
Oh,
Prince's
yeah,
unreleased
yeah, his unreleased stuff, you know, like, I'm a purple head. They used to call people who would follow Prince purple heads, kinda like the Grateful Dead. And I went to Paisley Park one time, and I was there, I was waiting till, like, 2 in the morning for him to come out, and he came out, and he did, like, a power trio set at, like, 2 in the morning at Paisley Park, and I
What?
sound yeah, he came out, everybody thought he was gonna play, like, some hit. He came out with a bass player and a drummer and did Hendrixian, Santana, like, power trio, Cream-like stuff for, like, 2 hours.
Wow.
And there were
Huh.
people, they say, in Purple Rain, he's like, "No." It's like, "I'm not playing that tonight." And it's like, he went and he played, like, Red House, he went and did all these, like, you know, Cream-like covers, and he was doing, like, his own stuff that was in that type of style, and I thought it was fantastic, and I always knew that he's that level kinda guy. He could, you know, do a Clapton type set. He could do a
Mhm.
Hendrixian set, he could do a Santana set because he's kinda in that mode, he could do it. And he can, you know, and he
You
would, and I
know,
was
it's got to be pretty painful for, and I'm sure there are plenty of artists out there like him with serious talent that are limited by their audience and by the labels. And it's like it's one level of like improbability to actually make it to to be playing these big festivals and major concerts touring the world. But then you could really be still unhappy because you're stuck playing the hits that suck that everybody wants
yeah,
to hear. And you want to
yeah,
play these other 10 other songs on
pieces,
your
yeah,
album that
yeah.
nobody knows about.
That's the problem when you get successful, because then, like, you know, you gotta be careful when you get successful because, like, what you wanna do is, you know, be true to your musical heart, right? And then the
Yeah.
fans actually just want you to play your top 10 hit over and over until
And
you, like,
over
don't
again.
wanna ever play it again.
Again. Yeah. And pretty
You
much
know?
like what do you get out of that other than like the fame? You don't get the
Yeah, well,
satisfaction of
that's
playing that
I
music.
guess you pay. You pay for your Learjet, you pay for your mansion.
So honestly,
Yeah.
on that context, I just want to mention this is why one of the reasons why, like, I've played a number of like I don't know, I, I played a number of pretty large festivals, and it's fun and it's enjoyable. And I think like would I rather have a life where I'm touring, playing the same hits over and over again, or would I rather have like a smaller audience that is passionate about whatever I play on a live stream concert type setting, like a stage it or sessions type of setting.
Yeah.
And I
Well, I've
kind of want to do
always
a little bit of both.
yeah, I mean, I think it's like I like jazz musicians because they kinda get it the way they want. Because they can go out and reinterpret, especially like fusion. They can do it however they feel like it that night, and the fans aren't
Yeah,
gonna be upset about it because that's what they expect.
yeah,
So, even like a jam band like the Almonds, they could go out and they would do their catalog, but they could go any way they wanted to go. And I used to see
yeah,
them all the time, and they would just be like the Dead. They just would go and extend it, and if they felt
yeah,
like it, they just jam on way longer than the original song, so it's not exactly what it was, and every night it would be different. And so, to me, that's more fun. They seemed like they were
yeah.
having fun. They seemed like they really, they didn't feel like they were just phoning it in.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Like, it's cool to have well produced stuff like Michael Jackson, but Jackson hated touring.
Yeah,
And
I can see
for a
that.
number of reasons, I would think, aside from his health problems. But if everything's like produced to the letter, to the note, to the movement, it's like it looks awesome. It feels awesome. Like after the fact, you can see how cool it looked on the camera. But like, are you really enjoying the experience on stage when it's like this tightly produced Broadway show equivalent?
Yeah, I mean, even
I don't know.
The Eagles kind of tore themselves apart because during the Hotel California era, it was my understanding that they fined the band if they didn't play the songs note for note like on Hotel California. So they actually will force themselves to every night play everything on Hotel California exactly as the record, which totally
Ah.
took. I mean, you got a guy like Joe Walsh on stage. You really want to rein him in and say he's got to stay within the confines of the original recording. Why would you do that? Why would you do
Also,
that?
also, I would think that the people who are going through the effort to buy tickets, expensive tickets, and show up in person, travel them from afar, they want to see a fresh
Yeah,
production, don't they?
yeah,
Otherwise, they could just turn on the radio.
yeah. But I guess they thought, and people wanted they heard it on the radio, and it really it really made the band feel like crap, because they didn't have fun, you know. And I don't know why they thought that was a good idea because it takes the fun out of doing anything, you know.
You know, I'm not even that in that position. When I do private events and somebody asks me to play Hotel California, in my head, I roll my eyes. I don't actually do it because I'm like, this is such an overplayed song. And then I play and I smile, but it's really like it's such an overplayed song, and it's like I play it to tracks. If I'm not with a
Yeah.
band, I'm playing it to tracks, so it's like I'm jamming out, which is cool. But
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's just like
on that
Freebird.
level, I can relate.
When somebody starts yelling "Freebird," we got to play "Freebird."
Yeah, you hear the same cliches.
Same people want to hear the same thing, like, "Oh, let's play some Tom Petty. Play Damn the Torpedoes," like the whole thing. Not I love it, but it's like overplayed. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think we kinda hit an hour, so I
Yeah.
think it's gonna but it's fun because what I like to do is like, kind of a musician, I try to make it comfortable, right? I try to get into a thing and then we forget how long we've been talking about. We hit like an hour.
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool to have you here. I think it's awesome that you're doing live instrumentation. You're in multiple genres. I think everybody needs to check you out, asherlaub.com. Check out the link. It will be up there. We'll be on iTunes. We'll be on multiple platforms. Check it out, and you'll get that as I send it to you through the channels, so you can send it to your fans. But we're very appreciative for you being on the show tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Phantom. It was really had a good time chatting with you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we'll surely talk again because I think we got some good ideas together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Look
Okay,
forward to
bye.
seeing your
Good
stuff.
night.
All right. Have a
Yep.
good night.